There are towns on this earth that carry something extra, something that does not show up on a map and cannot be explained by looking at a history book. Something that makes the people who live there speak in lower voices, or look out the window a little longer than usual before turning in for the night. Not all of them are abandoned. Some are full of life. Children go to school, people buy groceries, businesses open and close. And yet, threaded through the ordinary rhythm of everyday life is something that nobody has been able to fully explain. A sound that comes from nowhere, a fire that will not go out, a word carved into a tree, and an entire colony of people who were simply gone. Lights that have danced across the desert for more than a century with no source that science has confirmed. We are not talking about invented legends built to attract tourists, though some of these places have learned to live with the attention their mystery brings. We are talking about places where something real happened, or where something real is still happening, and where the full answer has not arrived. From the burning streets of Pennsylvania to the frozen ruins of the Soviet Arctic, from a vanished English colony on the American coast to a village in India that has sat empty for 2 centuries under what may or may not be a curse, today we travel through the 12 most mysterious towns on the planet. These places are real, their stories are documented, and in every single one of them, at least one important question remains open. Centralia, Pennsylvania, United States. Most towns die slowly. The young people leave. The businesses close. The buildings fall apart over decades. And eventually the grass grows over the streets, and the town becomes a memory. Centralia, Pennsylvania did not die slowly. It was consumed. And the thing consuming it is still burning today. Centralia sits in Columbia County in northeastern Pennsylvania, a former coal mining community that once had around 2,800 residents at its peak in the 1890s. By 2020, the census recorded 5 people. The post office closed, the zip code was revoked, the roads were condemned, and the fire beneath it all has been burning since 1962 and, according to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, could continue burning for another 250 years. It began with a dump fire. In May 1962, workers hired by the Centralia Borough Council set the town's landfill on fire to clean it up, which was a common practice at the time. But the landfill sat inside an abandoned strip mine pit. The fire burned through an unsealed opening in the pit and entered the enormous labyrinth of abandoned coal tunnels running beneath the entire town. Once it reached the coal seams, it became something that no one could stop. Between 1962 and 1982, government agencies spent more than $7 million trying to extinguish the fire. They sealed openings, they dug trenches, they filled the mines with non-combustible materials. Nothing worked. The fire spread along 4 fronts, burning at depths of up to 300 feet across an area of roughly 3,700 acres. In some locations, the underground temperature reached over 900 degrees Fahrenheit. By the 1980s, the effects were visible on the surface. Roads buckled, sinkholes opened in yards and streets, carbon monoxide gas crept into basements, trees turned black and died, smoke and steam rose through cracks in the ground. On Valentine's Day in 1981, a 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was standing in his yard when the ground gave way beneath him. He fell into a sinkhole more than 150 feet deep, lined with heat and toxic gas. He survived only because he was able to grab onto a tree root before his cousin arrived and pulled him out. By 1983, Congress allocated over $42 million to relocate residents. Most accepted the buyout. Their homes were demolished. Streets that had names and addresses were left as empty paved roads running through what looked like fields. By 1990, only 63 residents remained. In 1992, the state invoked eminent domain, condemned all remaining properties, and eliminated the town's zip code. A handful of residents refused to leave and eventually reached a legal settlement allowing them to live out the rest of their lives in Centralia, after which the state would take their homes. Today, Centralia looks like almost nothing. A grid of empty streets. A few cemeteries that cannot be moved. A single church that still holds services because solid rock, rather than coal, sits beneath it. Vents installed in the hillside release steam from the burning ground below. If you walk the streets on a cold morning, you can see the heat rising from the earth. The fire is real. The danger is real. The town is gone and will not come back. And the fire will outlive everyone reading this. Roanoke Island, North Carolina, United States. In August 1587, a group of 115 English settlers landed on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. They were there to build the first permanent English colony in the Americas. Among them were John White, who served as the colony's governor, his daughter Eleanor, and Eleanor's newborn baby, Virginia Dare, who became the first child of English parents ever born in the Americas. Within weeks of arriving, the colony was already in trouble. Supplies were running low. Relations with some of the surrounding Native American groups had been damaged by earlier English expeditions. John White made the decision to sail back to England to get help, leaving behind his daughter, his newborn granddaughter, and all 115 settlers. He did not plan to be gone long. What happened next was not his fault. When White arrived in England, a naval war had broken out with Spain. Queen Elizabeth called every available ship into service to defend against the Spanish Armada. White could not return, not for 3 years. When he finally arrived back at Roanoke in August 1590, the settlement was empty, not destroyed, not burned, not covered in signs of battle, simply empty. The buildings had been taken down carefully, as if the inhabitants had packed and moved deliberately. The only clue was a single word carved into a wooden post at the entrance to the settlement. The word was Croatoan, the name of a nearby island populated by a tribe known to be friendly to the colonists. On a separate tree, the letters CRO had been carved. There were no signs of violence, no Maltese cross, which was the signal the settlers had agreed to leave if they were in danger. White believed they had moved to Croatoan Island voluntarily, but storms prevented his ship from sailing there to search. He was forced to return to England. A proper search was never launched. The colonists were never found. For more than 400 years, the disappearance of those 115 people has remained America's oldest unsolved mystery. Theories have multiplied over the centuries. Some researchers believe the colonists merged with the Croatoan tribe, the ancestors of who are known today as the Lumbee people of North Carolina. There is some evidence for this. A historian visiting the area in the early 1700s found a local indigenous community with gray-eyed members who spoke of white ancestors. Archaeological digs over the past 2 decades have uncovered English artifacts in the area that was once Croatoan territory. DNA projects have tried to trace genetic links between potential descendants and colonial English bloodlines. Others have suggested the settlers fell victim to drought. Tree ring data from the period shows that the years between 1587 and 1589 saw the most extreme drought in the region in 800 years. A colony already short on food, surrounded by drought-struck land, may have been forced to disperse or face starvation. The Spanish were also in the region during this period. Some historians believe they may have found and destroyed the colony, though the Spanish were still actively searching for it as late as 1600, which makes this harder to confirm. No definitive answer has arrived. The colony was there, and then it was not. And the only thing left behind was a single carved word that may have pointed to the answer, if only someone had been able to follow it in time. Taos, New Mexico, United States. Taos is a small, beautiful town in the high desert of northern New Mexico, known for its Pueblo community that has been continuously inhabited for more than 1,000 years, for its art scene, and for the extraordinary landscape of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. It is also known for a sound. Residents began reporting it in the early 1990s. A persistent, low-frequency droning or buzzing noise described by different people as similar to the sound of a distant diesel engine idling, or a dishwasher running in another room, or a low propeller humming somewhere just over the horizon. The sound reportedly comes from everywhere and nowhere at once. It seems louder indoors than outdoors. It is worst at night. The problem is that not everyone can hear it. By best estimates, only around 2% of the local population reports hearing the Taos hum. Among those who do, the experience is not a minor curiosity. Some describe it as relentless and maddening. It disrupts sleep. It causes nausea, headaches, and fatigue. Attempts to block it by covering the ears make no difference, or sometimes make it worse. Some residents moved away and reported that the hum followed them for miles before eventually fading. The mystery became serious enough that in 1993, residents petitioned the United States Congress for an investigation. A scientific team was assembled from Los Alamos National Laboratory, Sandia National Laboratories, Phillips Air Force Laboratory, and the University of New Mexico. They brought sensitive monitoring instruments capable of detecting sound waves, seismic activity, and electromagnetic fields across a wide range of frequencies. They studied the area. They played sample tones to residents who claimed to hear the hum, asking them to identify the frequency. They surveyed thousands of people. Their conclusion was that the hum existed, that something was there, but they could not identify its source. Local industrial facilities were investigated and found to be insufficient to explain it. The hum persisted even when nearby power plants were temporarily shut down. Geological activity was considered as a possible cause, but the seismic data did not point to anything conclusive. Electromagnetic signals from military or communications equipment were proposed. High-pressure gas lines were suggested. Inner ear malfunction was explored. None of these explanations fully closed the question. The scientist who led the investigation, Rod Whitaker of Los Alamos National Laboratory, stated plainly at the end of the study that the team could not identify the origin of the sound. The Taos hum has since become part of the town's identity. A popular local hot sauce even carries the name. But the hum has never stopped. The residents who can hear it still hear it. And decades after the first formal investigation, science has not delivered a definitive source. Marfa, Texas, United States. In the wide, flat, remote high desert of West Texas, about 200 miles south of El Paso, sits the small city of Marfa. It has around 1,800 residents, a famous art scene that has drawn visitors and artists since the 1970s, and a mystery that has been going on since before anyone alive today was born. The Marfa lights are orbs of light that appear in the dark desert southeast of the city, floating in the area of Mitchell Flat near the Chinati Mountains. They have been reported since 1883, when a young cowhand named Robert Reed Ellison spotted flickering lights while driving cattle through Pisano Pass and wondered if they were Apache campfires. He asked other settlers about them. They told him they had seen the same lights regularly, but had never found any campfire, any ashes, or any footprints when they went to investigate. The lights have been reported by hundreds of people since then. During World War II, pilots from a nearby military airbase attempted to track and locate the lights from the air. They found nothing. Scientists, engineers, journalists, and curious visitors have studied them, watched for them, and attempted to explain them for more than a century. The Texas Department of Transportation eventually built a formal viewing area 9 miles east of town, specifically for watching the lights. What exactly are the Marfa lights? Nobody has reached a confirmed answer. A group of physics students from the University of Texas at Dallas spent several days in 2004 monitoring the area with cameras, traffic tracking equipment, and chase vehicles, and concluded that at least some of the lights visible from the viewing area were automobile headlights on a distant highway being distorted by layers of air at different temperatures, a mirage-like effect. This explanation accounts for lights that move in straight lines and correlate with traffic patterns. But it does not account for all the lights. Retired aerospace engineer James Bunnell spent 12 years from 2000 to 2012 photographing, measuring, and researching the lights, and concluded that the ones he categorized as genuine Marfa lights behaved differently from traffic distortions. They moved in ways that did not correlate with highway traffic. They merged, split, changed color, appeared in areas where no roads existed, and sometimes moved at what appeared to be extremely high speed before reversing direction. He suspected a connection to electromagnetic or plasma phenomena, possibly related to geological magnetic disturbances in the region. He could not confirm a source. The lights appear roughly a dozen times a year, sometimes on nights with no particular weather pattern, sometimes in conditions that seem to produce them reliably, and then produce nothing the following night. They have been described as white, yellow, red, and blue. They have been seen hovering, darting, rising slowly, falling and vanishing without any fade or flicker. More than 140 years after the first recorded sighting, nobody has confirmed what they are. Kuldhara, India. In the state of Rajasthan in northwestern India, about 18 miles west of the city of Jaisalmer, there is a village that has sat empty for almost 200 years. Kuldhara was once the home of a prosperous community of Paliwal Brahmins, a group known in the region for their skill in agriculture and trade. The village was established around the 13th century, and by the 19th century it was a settled, functioning community with stone houses, temples, wells, and streets. Then, sometime around 1825, every single resident left overnight and never returned. No record of where they went has been confirmed. No documentation of what happened to them. They were simply gone, and in the 2 centuries since, nobody has moved in to take their place. The legend that surrounds Kuldhara is well known in Rajasthan. The story most commonly told is that the local ruler, a powerful and feared administrator, demanded that the daughter of one of the village's most respected elders be brought to him. The Paliwal Brahmins, rather than comply or face ongoing persecution, made a collective decision to abandon not only Kuldhara, but all the surrounding villages simultaneously. According to the legend, as they left, they placed a curse on the land, declaring that no one would ever be able to settle there again. What can be confirmed is that the village was abandoned. What can be confirmed is that attempts to resettle the area over the following decades did not result in any permanent community. The Archaeological Survey of India has declared Kuldhara a protected heritage site. The ruins of the stone houses still stand. The streets are still visible. The temples are still there. People who have visited and stayed after dark have reported strange sounds and feelings of being watched that they could not explain. In 2013, a team from the Indian Paranormal Society spent a night in Kuldhara with monitoring equipment and reported readings they described as anomalous. None of this has been confirmed by scientific analysis. What has been confirmed is this: a village of hundreds of people, thriving and settled for centuries, was abandoned in a single night. No one came back, and no one has been able to explain exactly where they went or why the land has remained empty ever since. Pripyat, Ukraine. In April 1986, a nuclear reactor at the Chernobyl power plant exploded. The explosion released radiation into the surrounding air, water, and soil at levels that made the nearby area uninhabitable, and the nearest town, the planned Soviet city of Pripyat, was evacuated almost overnight. Pripyat had been built in 1970 specifically to house the workers of the Chernobyl plant and their families. It was a model Soviet city, modern and well-funded by the standards of the time. At the time of the explosion, around 50,000 people lived there. Apartment buildings, schools, hospitals, a hotel, an amusement park with a Ferris wheel, a sports complex, and wide tree-lined boulevards all served a population that had no warning of what was coming. When the evacuation came, residents were told to bring only what they needed for a few days. They were told they would return. They left their furniture in place. Their children's toys stayed on the floors. Books remained open on tables. In the amusement park, a new Ferris wheel that had never even been used for public rides sat as it was left, alongside a fleet of bumper cars that had carried passengers only a few times before the evacuation. They never returned. Radiation levels in and around Pripyat remain dangerous, though they have decreased significantly in the decades since the accident. Nature has taken the town. Trees grow through floors, moss covers walls. Foxes, wolves, and other wildlife have moved into buildings that no human has lived in for nearly 40 years. The amusement park, the school corridors, the hospital with its discarded protective gear, the apartments with family photos still on the walls, all of it decays in slow motion inside an exclusion zone that most people are not permitted to enter. Pripyat is not mysterious in the way that Kuldhara or Roanoke is mysterious. What happened there is documented with painful precision. The mystery of Pripyat is a different kind. It is the mystery of a life that stopped at one moment and was simply left there, intact, for time to dissolve. The personal objects of 50,000 people, abandoned in an instant, slowly disappearing into a landscape that was never theirs to begin with. Hashima Island, Japan. Off the coast of Nagasaki in southern Japan, rising from the sea like a concrete fortress, sits Hashima Island. It is small enough to cross in a few minutes on foot, and yet it once held one of the densest human populations ever recorded on Earth. Hashima was a coal mining island. Mitsubishi purchased it in 1890 and began building facilities to extract the coal deposits under the seafloor. Over the following decades, the island was transformed. Concrete seawalls were built around the entire perimeter to protect against waves. Multi-story apartment buildings were constructed, stacked as closely together as possible to house the growing workforce. The island had schools, a hospital, a cinema, shops, a swimming pool, rooftop gardens, and community spaces. At its peak in the early 1960s, around 5,300 people lived on an island of just 16 acres. That works out to a population density far exceeding anything found in Tokyo or New York City at the time. Then, in 1974, the coal ran out. The mine was no longer profitable. Mitsubishi announced it would close. Workers and their families were given a short time to gather what they could and leave. And within a matter of weeks, the island was empty. Everything was left. Furniture, clothing, personal belongings, children's school materials, household goods, kitchen equipment. The seawalls kept people in while the coal lasted and kept weather out afterward, but time worked on the buildings from within. Concrete crumbled, steel rusted. The sea and the weather slowly pulled the structures apart. For decades, the island was completely off limits, sitting a few miles offshore in a state of accelerating decay. Hashima was reopened to limited tourism in 2009 and designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2015. Visitors can walk along designated paths near the edge of the island and look into the ruins, though entry into the buildings themselves is forbidden due to structural collapse risk. Hashima carries a particular darkness beyond the abandonment. During World War II, the Imperial Japanese government used Korean and Chinese forced laborers in the mines under conditions documented as brutal. Many died. Their story was denied for decades before being more fully acknowledged in recent years. The island sits there now, still visible from the Nagasaki coast, being gradually reclaimed by salt air and time. It was one of the most densely populated places on the planet, and it is now empty, and nobody will ever live there again. Bodie, California, United States, high in the mountains of eastern California, at an elevation of over 8,000 feet, sits Bodie. The wind comes through it almost constantly. In winter, the temperature drops far below freezing, and the snow piles high against the wooden walls of buildings that have not been repaired in well over a century. Bodie was a gold rush town. When gold was discovered there in 1859, the town grew rapidly. By the late 1870s, it had a population estimated between 7,000 and 10,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in California at the time. It had saloons, banks, hotels, newspapers, schools, churches, brothels, and a reputation for extraordinary violence and lawlessness. Murders were reportedly so common in Bodie's peak years that some sources suggest the town averaged at least one killing per day during its most dangerous period. The community was so rough that it was said a young girl whose family was moving there wrote in her diary that she was going to bad Bodie. The gold ran out, the population collapsed. By the early 20th century, Bodie was nearly empty. A fire in 1932 burned much of what remained. The last full-time residents left around 1942. The state of California designated Bodie a state historic park in 1962, and since then it has been maintained in what park officials call a state of arrested decay, not restored, not demolished, but simply stabilized to slow further deterioration. Today, around 170 structures still stand in Bodie, the largest surviving ghost town in the American West. Household goods are still inside the homes. A pool table sits in the saloon. Old cars rust in the streets. The bank vault stands open and empty. Church pews still face the pulpit. What makes Bodie mysterious is not what happened there. Gold rush towns followed a well-documented pattern of rise and collapse. What makes it mysterious is what it feels like. The buildings are complete enough that the town looks inhabited from a distance, but nothing moves. No curtains shift in the wind because the windows have no glass. The silence is specific and dense, the kind of silence a place has when it was once very loud and is now permanently not. Several local legends have attached themselves to Bodie, including stories of a curse that falls on anyone who removes an object from the town. Park rangers confirm they receive letters every year from former visitors returning items they took, along with apologies and descriptions of bad luck that followed the theft. Whether the curse is real is a question the letters themselves suggest some people take very seriously. Oradour-sur-Glane, France. On June 10, 1944, 4 days after the Allied landings at Normandy, the small French village of Oradour-sur-Glane was surrounded by a unit of German Waffen-SS troops. What followed happened in less than a day. The soldiers rounded up the entire population of the village. The men were separated from the women and children. The men were taken to barns and outbuildings around the village and shot. Then the buildings were set on fire to burn the bodies. The women and children were herded into the village church. The church was also set on fire. When people attempted to escape, soldiers shot them in the doorways and windows. When it was over, more than 640 people had been killed. The village itself was burned. The German military's official reason for the massacre has never been satisfactorily established. Some historians believe it was carried out as collective punishment in response to French resistance activity in the region. Others believe the village may have been confused with another nearby town. The soldiers responsible have never offered a clear explanation. Only one conviction related to the massacre was ever upheld in a final legal judgment, and it came more than 50 years after the event. After the war, the French government made a decision that set Oradour apart from every other destroyed village in France. It would not be rebuilt. It would not be cleared. The ruins would be left exactly as they were on June 10, 1944, and so they have been. Burned-out cars stand in the streets where they stopped. Sewing machines sit in the ruins of houses. The church interior is still scorched. A new Oradour was built nearby for the survivors and their descendants to live in. But the old village stands exactly as it was left, frozen at the moment of its destruction, maintained as a memorial and a permanent record of what happened. The mystery of Oradour is not supernatural. It is human. Why were those particular people in that particular village killed on that particular afternoon? The official records are incomplete. The soldiers did not explain themselves, and the village stands as an open question, preserved in a way that ensures the question will be asked as long as the ruins remain. Poveglia Island, Italy. In the Venetian lagoon, not far from the southern edge of Venice, lies a small island called Poveglia. It is not large, it is not striking from a distance, but it carries what may be the heaviest history of any inhabited piece of land in the Mediterranean. For centuries, Poveglia served as a quarantine station. Ships arriving in Venice during outbreaks of plague were required to stop at Poveglia, where passengers who were sick or suspected of carrying disease were detained. Many died there. During the Black Death of the 14th century and subsequent plague outbreaks, the dead from Venice were also transported to Poveglia and buried in mass graves. The bodies eventually had to be burned. Estimates of how many people died and were buried or cremated on the island over the centuries vary, but some historians suggest the number may exceed 160,000. A 2006 soil analysis reportedly found that the ground on parts of the island is composed of more than 50% human ash. In the early 20th century, a psychiatric hospital was built on the island. Patients were housed there for decades. Stories circulated that a doctor at the facility conducted experimental procedures on patients in a bell tower, and that the doctor eventually went mad himself and jumped from the tower, though the historical record for these specific accounts is disputed. The hospital closed in 1968. The island has been uninhabited since. It is currently off limits to the public, owned by the Italian government. Occasional attempts to develop or sell it have never resulted in any project moving forward. Fishermen in Venice have long reportedly avoided casting their nets near Poveglia, citing the human bones that occasionally surface in the surrounding water. The Italian government has permitted very limited access for researchers and journalists, none of whom have produced any scientific documentation of paranormal activity, though many report a discomfort on the island that they struggle to explain rationally. Poveglia is not mysterious because of legends. It is heavy because of what can be confirmed: the plague dead, the quarantine, the hospital, the silence since 1968, and an island that the city it borders seems, by quiet agreement, to prefer to simply leave alone. Pyramiden, Norway. High in the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard, roughly halfway between Norway and the North Pole, sits Pyramiden. To reach it, you cross open sea where polar bears outnumber people and pack ice drifts through the summer months. You sail past glaciers and under skies that do not grow dark in summer and do not brighten in winter. Pyramiden was a Soviet mining settlement founded by Sweden in 1910 and purchased by the Soviet Union in 1927. Over the following decades, it was built into a full-functioning community in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. At its peak, it housed more than 1,000 people. The Soviets built schools, a cultural center, a library, a gymnasium, an indoor heated swimming pool, a theater, a canteen, and residential blocks. They planted a lawn and maintained it, growing grass in the Arctic as a statement of what Soviet planning could achieve anywhere. A large bust of Lenin overlooked the settlement, facing toward a glacier across the fjord. In 1998, the mine became unprofitable. The population was evacuated. The settlement was left almost exactly as it was. The swimming pool still has water in it. The gymnasium still has equipment. The library still has books on the shelves. The piano in the cultural center still sits in place. The bust of Lenin still looks out toward the glacier, and all of it has been sitting in the Arctic air since 1998, slowly freezing, slowly rusting, slowly being claimed by the cold. Pyramiden is now accessible to visitors who book organized tours from Longyearbyen, the nearest Norwegian settlement. A small number of Russian workers maintain the buildings during the warmer months. But the town itself is essentially a museum of Soviet ambition, preserved by the same cold that made it so extraordinary to build in the first place. There was no war, no disaster, no explosion. The mine simply stopped paying, and the town was abandoned with a thoroughness that left an entire civilization's worth of objects behind in the dark. Walking through Pyramiden today feels by many accounts like walking through a moment that simply stopped, a feeling that something could start again at any minute if the people who were here simply came back. They will not come back. Whitmore, the Vanishing Village, Scotland. In the remote highlands of Scotland, there are places where you can walk across open land that was once full of people and find only the faint outlines of stone foundations beneath the grass. Entire communities that once farmed, fished, raised children, buried their dead, and built small but real lives in one of Europe's most demanding landscapes. These settlements did not simply decline, they were deliberately cleared. Between the late 18th century and the mid-19th century, a process known as the Highland Clearances swept through the Scottish Highlands and Islands. Landlords, many of them newly wealthy in the context of the British Agricultural Revolution, found that raising sheep on the land was more profitable than leasing small plots to tenant farmers. So they cleared the tenants, Families who had lived on specific land for generations were evicted, often with little warning. Their homes were sometimes burned to prevent return. They were resettled in coastal areas where the land was poor, or they emigrated to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. One of the most striking examples of what was left behind is the settlement of Baal Mor na H. Erda on the island of Jura, along with dozens of similar cleared settlements across Sutherland, Ross, and Cromarty, and the Western Isles. In Sutherland alone, a landlord known as the Marquess of Stafford, later the Duke of Sutherland, was responsible for the clearing of an estimated 15,000 people between 1811 and 1820. What makes these places mysterious is not a supernatural explanation, but a human one. The foundations of homes are still visible. The field patterns where people once grew food are still readable from above. The wells are still there. And the people who lived in them left so completely, so unwillingly, so finally, that what remains behind is not evidence of collapse, but evidence of removal. The absence is not the absence of something that ended naturally. It is the absence of something that was taken. Scotland's cleared villages sit quietly in landscape that looks empty, but it was not always empty. And the silence that fills it now carries the weight of what was decided for the people who called it home. Fordlandia, Brazil. Deep in the Amazon rainforest of northern Brazil, hours from any significant town, there is a place where you can find a water tower built in the style of a small American Midwestern city. Roads, bungalows with front porches, a golf course reclaimed by jungle, fire hydrants, a hospital building, all of it under the relentless press of the Amazon, crumbling and overgrown and yet still recognizable as something that was built to last. This is Fordlandia, and it was built by Henry Ford. In 1928, Ford purchased 2.5 million acres of Amazon jungle in the Brazilian state of Para. His plan was to build a plantation that would produce enough natural rubber to supply his automobile factories without depending on British-controlled rubber markets in Asia. He would also, in his vision, bring American order, morality, and industrial efficiency to the Amazon. He built a town. He shipped in American workers and Brazilian laborers. He constructed hospitals, schools, stores, and houses with American-style architecture. He banned alcohol and tobacco. He insisted on American food in the canteen. He tried to plant rubber trees in rows, the way a proper industrial plantation should look. Everything went wrong. The rubber trees, planted in dense rows without the spacing that the Amazon's natural rubber trees require, were immediately and devastatingly attacked by a leaf blight that thrives when the trees are crowded together. Brazilian workers rioted over the American food, the rigid schedule, and the treatment they received. American supervisors fled into the jungle when the riot began. Diseases including malaria and yellow fever swept through the settlement in a climate Ford's planners had apparently not fully prepared for. Ford tried to fix it. He moved the operation to a new site. He brought in plant biologists. He spent years and enormous sums of money. Nothing worked. In 1945, Ford's company sold Fordlandia back to the Brazilian government for less than a fraction of what had been spent. The workers left. The jungle began moving in immediately. Today, a small Brazilian town called Fordlandia survives on the edge of the original site, populated by the descendants of workers who stayed. The ruins of Ford's original ambition sit behind them, being absorbed by the forest at a pace that makes it clear the Amazon never considered the arrangement to be permanent. The mystery of Fordlandia is the mystery of certainty. Henry Ford was one of the most powerful industrialists who ever lived. He had money, engineers, ambition, and the absolute conviction that he could make the Amazon behave the way he wanted it to. The forest answered that conviction in its own time and in its own way. These 12 towns sit on different continents, in different eras, and in different kinds of mystery. Some were destroyed by decisions made by those in power. Some were abandoned by the forces of nature or economics. Some were built in the wrong place for the wrong reasons. Some simply carry a sound, or a light, or a single carved word that has never been fully explained. But all of them have one thing in common. They ask a question that the people who come after are left to sit with. Why were those people gone? What is that sound? Where did the fire begin, and why won't it end? Who lived here, and what did it cost them to leave? Towns do not keep their own secrets. The secrets are kept by time, by the land, by incomplete records, and by the simple fact that the people who knew the full answer are gone. And so the questions remain open, sitting in the ruins, or in the desert, or beneath the burning ground, waiting for someone to arrive with the right question and enough patience to listen for the answer. After learning about all these places, which one would you most want to visit and explore? Leave it in the comments. And if you want to keep traveling to the places on this planet that hold more than they show, subscribe to Parallel Facts. We will keep going.